Sadunya memuji, ku tanya santian bala buah batembok, balampu tak berminyak. Oi liek pulau malah untung yo orang dagangnya senti haram kok basuh dompet barisi jo air mato senti kok basuh dompet barisi jo air mato. Bengawan Solo, riwayatmu ini sedari dulu jadi perhatian insani. Musim ke
Hi, good evening everyone and welcome to the NUS Baba House. I'm Danielle, the assistant manager from the outreach team here. Thank you for your support of this series over the past month and joining us once again because this is the final talk in this series. The Dialects and Dialogues Language Speaker Series was devised to complement the discussions within the NUS Baba House's current exhibition, Glossaries of the Straits Chinese Homemaking, which touches upon identity formation among early settlers in colonial Singapore. Over the past few weeks, we've had a primer on the evolution of the linguistic landscape in Singapore with Dr. Phyllis Chew's talk, followed by literature in the region with Dr. Azhar Ibrahim. Dr. Nala Lee then laid out issues in the present surrounding language, looking at documentation of endangered languages such as Baba Malay. Given the more historical background that we have gained from previous talks, we want to continue the conversation about what language means to us in today's day and age, and how we can reimagine and reintroduce the diversity of languages through contemporary literature. As such, we are very honored to have Kenneth Chan to talk about just that. As Dr. Lee has mentioned last week, Baba Malay is at the verge of obscurity and is at great risk of being lost within a few generations. The loss of this native language will eventually spell the end of its rich intangible heritage, which has already seen generations of degradation. Kenneth's writing of Chrita-Chrita Baba is an attempt to reintroduce various elements of not only the language, but also various traditions, folklore, rituals, and beliefs that were once commonplace to a Peranakan person. Kenneth Chan is an educator and is currently involved within the Peranakan community with efforts to revive the use of Baba Malay. He is also the author of Mari Chakap Baba, the first ever Malay textbook, which is currently being used to teach Baba Malay classes. And the Chrita-Chrita Baba, a collection of short stories written in both Baba Malay and English, presented side by side on facing pages. Chrita-Chrita Baba is the first book that is written in Baba Malay, the Peranakan language within the Baba Nyonya community since the early 1900s. So that is an introduction to Kenneth's talk today. So I'll quickly pass the time over to him now, who will begin his sharing.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Hold on a second while I turn on my slides. Okay, so today I'm here to talk about the writing of Chrita-Chrita Baba, a means to save the Peranakan language. I'll begin with a very brief description of what Baba Malay is, and then I'll move on to examine the existing works in Baba Malay that led to me writing Chrita-Chrita Baba. After that, I will talk about the issue about standardization, which was one of the issues that I had when deciding to write this book. And finally, I'll talk about in depth about writing the actual book. All right, let's begin. So, question, what is Baba Malay? Now, I won't dwell too long on this simply because it's been brought up over and over again by previous speakers, but just a very quick, brief overview on the definition of Baba Malay. Now, Baba Malay started out as a contact language between various cultures. As I think Dr. Asa mentioned, it was a cultural bridge, we were cultural brokers. Yes, that was a very good term. And as a contact language, allowed various cultures, various ethnic groups to communicate with each other. It was largely a spoken language, and at that time it was largely known as just Bazaar Malay. Then it evolved over time after Portuguese colonization, we had the Dutch, and the language became a little bit more evolved, a little bit more developed. And from here, from a pidgin, it might have actually started becoming a Creole, where we actually started seeing pockets of native speakers in this language. And it wasn't until 1913 when a missionary first used the term Baba Malay. And he actually noted differences between Bazaar Malay and Baba Malay. And this is quite important because it's not the same thing. Of course, if you ask people, and I suspect if you had the opportunity to time travel back to the day and ask an actual Baba, what do you speak? That person wouldn't say Baba Patwa or Baba Malay. That person would claim that he or she would be speaking Malay, Cakap Melayu. And this is actually still true of today. If you have the opportunity to talk to our elders, people in their 80s, 90s, and so forth, you can ask them, what do you speak? They will not say Baba Malay. They will probably say Gua Cakap Melayu, which is I'm speaking Malay. And of course, it would probably follow with an apology that their Malay is not proper, it's not good, it's our kind of Malay and so forth. And of course, we have this term, Baba Patwa, which you cringe, okay? It's a favorite term among contemporary users, but it's linguistically incorrect term. I mean, Patwa denotes that the language is broken, it's inferior. I mean, the very word, the root word, Patwa from Old French means uneducated rural class. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by calling it Baba Patwa. Instead, the term used by linguists and academics today is Baba Malay. And as brought up by the other speakers over the last few weeks, it is the language of the Peranakan Chinese, and it is critically endangered. So here's a quick overview of how the term Baba Malay has evolved over the years. So I will use the term Baba Malay exclusively here. And when I speak of Baba Malay, I'm specifically talking about the Peranakan Chinese Baba Malay that's used in Strait Settlement, the former Strait Settlement. No reference to the language used elsewhere, like in Nusantara or Indonesia and so forth. Okay, so what is Baba Malay? As I mentioned earlier, Baba Malay was largely a linguistic bridge between different cultures of the past. It was the language of trade for people back then. It is the mother tongue of the Peranakan Chinese of the former Strait Settlement. And most importantly, it is the tool of transmission of intangible heritage. Now, Baba Malay is a home language. That's to mean it's usually spoken at home. Yes, used for trade last time, but as it evolved over time, it was just restricted to use at home. It was used just orally. There was hardly a written form was very uncommon, and it was transmitted informally, meaning that people didn't go to school to learn this language. And it tended to be different from family to family. Now, Baba Malay was very important in terms of intangible heritage because it was, again, a tool to pass on oral traditions. And these oral traditions basically define what it means to be Baba or Peranakan. It was used in daily practices and rituals, religious practices, cultural practices. For instance, we would take Chinese practices. Normally, things would be said in Chinese, but instead we would say them in Baba Malay. For instance, Chinese New Year greetings, birthday greetings. We would say things like "Panjang panjang umur, kuat kuat badan, murah murah jerky," right? This translates exactly like how the Chinese would wish fortune and prosperity and longevity, right? Baba Malay, in the transmission of oral tradition, it was also a tool used in passing on cooking, recipes. Everything we have today is thanks to Baba Malay. If it weren't, we would not have all our wonderful dishes. It was passed on orally. Dondang sayang, pantun, wayang peranakan, all through the language, not written down usually. And of course, without doubt, oral tradition, general swearing and cursing. Without Baba Malay, our culture wouldn't be so colorful. All right, so now that we know roughly what I'm trying to talk about, let's move on to written works. Let us examine the written works that led to the creation of my book. Now, the written works that I'm looking at are largely within this time period, the late 19th century to the mid 1900s. And this is what I call the rise of written works in Baba Malay. Again, disclaimer, I'm specifically talking about written works in the former Strait Settlement, not works in Indonesia. Okay, so when considering written works, before I examine all the past written works available, I was examining what I should consider when writing this Chrita-Chrita Baba. I was asking myself, which version of Baba Malay should I utilize? How about the spelling convention? Sentence structure, every writer does it differently. More importantly, who is my audience and why am I writing this book? So this led me to examine some of the existing works. I was able to look through letters, pantun, and cerita dulu kala. There is the existence of Peranakan Baba Malay newspapers. However, I wasn't able to get my hands on them to examine them closely, so I left that out. Okay, let's begin firstly with letters. Now, letters were very interesting. They tended to be very personal. Often it was a mix between English, Standard Malay, and Baba Malay. While examining them, I noticed that the spelling was often very inconsistent, especially between different writers. Tone was informal, even though sometimes it was written for business. But one problem that I did encounter was the availability of these letters were very difficult to come by. And sometimes they were a bit too personal, so it would not be too appropriate to go through people's personal love letters and so forth. But one thing that I did, I came to a conclusion that letters were not very suitable to study because it was not very representative of the written works in existence. It was quite concentrated on a few individuals only. So anyway, let me show you an example. So this is a letter that I got from Felix Chia's The Babas. Okay, so here we have a letter. He stated in his book that this belonged to his uncle. And I'll read it for you. My dear, gua ada dapat notis yang Melaka Rubber Treating Company ada panggil meeting 15 Disember. Ini mau confirm itu minutes yang sudah pas di meeting 29 November 1921. Karenanya, gua tidak boleh pergi attend to meeting 15 December. Kita di sini punya shareholders, harap yang lu boleh tolong tengokkan yang itu liquidators punya fee jangan ditaruhkan terlalu banyak. Sebab sekarang tempuh slum dan sedikit pun kalau dapat dikurangkan, sedikit juga dapat kita merasanya. Harap lu ada baik. Yours sincerely. So here it's interesting because there are a lot of scatterings of English words, and of course, I think the writer obviously had no choice because these are very modern terms, very business terms. It's a formal business letter, yet I feel that it's written very informally. Next, let's examine pantuns. And I had the opportunity to look through quite a number of pantuns. Again, hats off to Dr. Azhar for enlightening us about Sha'e. I had no idea that some of these pantuns are actually perhaps Sha'e. So anyway, back to this. So pantuns are often a mix of Baba Malay and Standard Malay. So it's not pure Baba. Spelling was often inconsistent, especially between writers, which is an ongoing issue with the works. And more importantly, there were frequent use of very archaic terms, and some concepts were just, and I feel that unless you are a study of history or you lived during that time period, it would be very difficult for you to comprehend. Let's take a look at a pantun. Now, this pantun was penned down by Kohontek. Kohontek was a very prolific writer of pantuns and Dondang Sayang. In fact, he was one of the original founders of Gunung Sayang Association. So here we have a sample of a beautiful, beautiful pantun. Let me read it. The translation's on the right. Sehari pandang Raja di Aceh, mandi berjurus air mawar, daripada hati yang kasih, racun diminum jadi penawar. Kalau tuan turun ke laut, pasang pelita dengan karatnya. Sakit saya setengah maut, tuan seorang pengobatnya. Raja Endok, Raja Kelantan, sehingga meminang kapri di awan. Sebagi pongkok rindukan bulan, begitulah cintakan tuan. Beautiful, very, very beautiful. Now, this is a very good example of what I meant by archaic and difficult to understand. a lot of these references are to things that are long past, and I think unless you're you study history or you have a natural interest in history, it might be a little bit difficult to understand. And more specifically, I would like everyone's attention to the last verse, the second stanza, where I have a lot of question marks there. I'll read it in English. King Endok is king of Kelantan. The lion proposes as in proposed marriage, proposes to something. He uses the word Capri in the clouds. Okay, so I was asking around, what does Capri mean in Baba? Because this word is foreign to me. And an elder told me Capri in Baba means an African person. So if you think about it, this makes no sense. The lion proposes marriage to an African in the clouds. You know, that just boggles me. So after examining it for a long time and discussing it with our elders, it would make more sense that Capri might mean like something like a heavenly being, like a fairy. Bidadari might be an actual word. But what we concluded was Capri back in the early 1900s might have had multiple meanings besides African. So in today's Baba Malay, if we had something like this and you reference a Baba Malay dictionary, you would be very confused. Okay, and lastly, of course, I had the privilege of going through a lot of Cerita Dulu Kala, some from the library, some from people's personal collections. And this was a trove of wealth. I was able to learn a lot, and it helped me in the writing of my book. Now, Cerita Dulu Kala is often a mix of Baba Malay, Standard Malay, Hokkien. And this led me to a huge question mark because this language, Cerita Dulu Kala, spans from the late 1800s until the mid 1900s. And there's a clear evolution in the language. I couldn't help but ask myself, where did the Malay stop and the Baba Malay begin? You know, and I think this would be a wonderful area for some person to study in the future. Anyway, back to this. The spelling was very inconsistent, especially between writers. Even within a series, spelling might differ. These are basically translation works of classical Chinese literary works. So they weren't essentially original works. They were just translations. Earlier works were filled with archaic Hokkien and Malay words. This is just something that I thought was very interesting that I wanted to share. This comes from Chan Kim Boon's Samkok, volume 10. And this illustration was inside the book. And it depicts himself working with his associates, writing this book. And I found this very amusing, very, very fascinating. Chan Kim Boon was also known as Batu Gantung. He's a Penang Baba, but he resided and works in Singapore. He used to have I think an office or a residence right on Telok Ayer Street opposite Tian Hock King Temple, in fact. But Batu Gantung, in fact, is a place in Penang, but strangely, it is the name of a graveyard. So it's very strange why he chose that name to be his pen name, to be his nickname. Okay, back to written works. So over here, I have something to compare. We have a 1893 Samkok by Chan Kim Boon on the left, and on the right we have Botan Kyong Chu by another famous Baba writer, Wan Boon Singh, in 1950. And this is in fact the last Cerita Dulu Kala from the Straits settlement, former Straits settlement. Okay. Now, just by looking at it, you might not realize any difference, but maybe you can see Chinese characters on the left and a lot of strange little accents he uses on the left. Now, what I'm trying to show here is the language had evolved quite a lot during this time. A closer look. This is another page from Chan Kim Boon's Samkok, this time volume 13. And I'm just translating a little portion for you to see. Okay, so let me read it for you. Saya memberitahu kita punya kawan-kawan di sini masing-masing ada banyaklah gaduh dan bilang kenapa sobat salingkan tu cerita Samkok begitu lambat sekali. Sampai 3-4 bulan baru boleh siap satu book. Okay, so what I've done here is I've underlined several words and I've displayed them below. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to show you the difference in spelling compared to Wan Bun Sing, which we will see later. Okay, the words that are not underlined are more or less similar till today. So in contemporary Baba Malay, it's still spelled the same, pronounced the same. Okay, let's compare Wan Bun Sing's version of Cerita Dulu Kala. Okay, just off the bat, if you look at the little excerpt that I translated here, you will notice that there aren't that many words that I've underlined, simply showing that the 1950 version of Baba Malay is more similar to what we are used to in contemporary Baba Malay today. Okay, I read, Siangkong atau Baba bertiga boleh sudikan rasa ini laut-laut dan minumlah arak wangi sekali. Sebab ni arak yang ada di meja, kita bertiga beradik sendiri baking dan buat makan sendiri. So again, the words that I've underlined are a little bit different from Samkok, Chan Kim Boon's version. So besides spelling, there's also the matter of syntax, sentence structure, and the way that things were worded back then can be quite confusing, simply because things were written like how it was spoken. So if you read it with contemporary writing in mind, it might be very difficult to understand. So let's examine this a little bit closer. Kong Bing bilang, so the translations there, so you can read the translation as I read in Baba. Liang sungguh tak pandai, tetapi ada pernah jumpa sama Ijin yang ada kasih pelajaran heran dari kitab dan su. Boleh teriak angin, boleh panggil hujan. Jikalau tutup mau pakai tong lam hong, boleh suruh orang naikkan satu tai di atas lampinsan dan namakan itu tai. So don't forget, these were translations of ancient Chinese literary works. This is like a kung fu movie here. All right, so Baba literature was extremely popular in the 19th century. And why? What attributed to this? Well, the average Baba possessed very low standards of English at that time. They communicated mainly in Baba Malay. A Baba person could probably no longer read, write, or speak Chinese. But they still had a strong influence from their ancestral Chinese culture, right? Rituals, religion, most of them were still Taoist at that time. And perhaps they had a yearning for their ancestral past, so they started, they wanted to read about old Chinese classics, or perhaps it was the influence from our Peranakan cousins across the sea, Batavia. They actually embarked on Baba literature much earlier than us over here in Malaya and Singapore. Now, the demand for Baba literary works reached its pinnacle during this time, 19th century. And at the height of demand, there were around 43 authors, editors, and translators of Baba Malay. That's incredible. Compared to much later on in the 20th century, Baba literature started declining. Why? Well, English started replacing Baba. There was a greater access to education, which ironically led to the decline of Baba Malay. The younger generations of Baba could no longer relate to the stories of their ancestors. They were not so interested with Chinese stories anymore. And religious conversion also played a part in the erosion of cultural practices. People started converting to other religions and no longer practice old Chinese rituals. And of course, World War II, cannot deny, took a heavy toll on our population. So this picture over here is in fact the last Cerita Dulu Kala by Wan Boon Singh. And Wan Boon Singh was quite a character. He also was the editor of a newspaper, Bintang Peranakan, if I'm not mistaken. And did you know that he used to live around Changi Road? All right. Well, his last book, this Botang Kiong Chu, was poorly received. And of course, the national policies and the CMIO framework effectively served as the final nail in the coffin for Baba Malay. And so we have it, the end of our literature. So with all this in mind, what I realized from going through all these old works, written works, was there was a serious need for standardization before I embarked on writing anything myself. Now, standardization was crucial because of several reasons. Most importantly, most readers would probably be new learners. They wouldn't know any Baba Malay or just a few phrases, not enough to qualify them to be actual readers of my work. And unlike the audience of the past, even if we had differences in spelling and sentence structure, chances are readers from the past could understand simply because they might speak some form of Malay, Baba or Bazaar or even Standard Malay. Contemporary readers in Singapore would definitely not be able to understand a word. So it was important for standardization. In addition, Chrita-Chrita Baba might very likely influence future works in the Baba language. And with standardization, obviously, it will be easier to teach future learners and easier for people to understand what I'm writing. Okay. Fortunately, when I talk about standardization, it's a long process. It's actually been studied by social linguistics. There are various stages of language standardization. I'm not going to talk about that here, but I was very fortunate in the sense that I did not have to reinvent the wheel or actually to champion standardization, because that work had already started years ago. I don't have the data to prove it for a fact, but I suspect it might have started sometime in the 90s or maybe in the late 80s with the Wayang Peranakan. So I'll talk about that later. But in terms of published works, we have Mas 10, which was first published in 93 by Uncle William Gui. And Gui documented Baba sayings from his elders and contemporaries. Mind you, he is in his mid-80s right now. So we're talking about his father and his great-grandfather's generation. So that's quite a fair bit of Baba Malay, like native-speaking Baba Malay. And he documented idioms and Baba saying, and he formally defined Baba's speech, especially for the Nyonya folk. I'll talk about that later. It's about the Kasa and Halus form. And I personally feel that is a definitive work that inspired all future works in Baba Malay usage and revival. Now, with Mas 10 came a natural, logical progression, an actual dictionary. So in 2006, after years of compiling words, which is still not finished actually, he's actually got part 2, a Baba Malay dictionary. And here we see evidence of actual standardization of spelling. Now he wrote this in hopes that people who were studying Baba Malay and script writers, especially the wayang plays, would use his work to standardize the work. So one day when somebody wants to learn them, it might actually be easier. And from there, in 2007, 1 year later, after that Baba Malay dictionary was published, we see Speak Baba Malay, The Easy Way by Pastor Philip Chan. And this was the first formal phrase book in Baba Malay. And what's interesting to note is Philip Chan follows the standardization put forth by William Gui. And this is the first written work showing maintenance of a standardization process. And of course, comes to my book. My wife and I wrote the first formal Baba Malay textbook. And of course, we followed the standardization put forth by William Gui. Makes no sense to reinvent the wheel. We also drew on grammatical research done by Dr. Nala Lee in her PhD dissertation, as well as research done by prior Baba Malay researchers such as Professor N. Parquet, Sunny Lim, Professor Tan Chi Beng. And I would like to call this version of Baba Malay is more contemporary. Why I call it more contemporary because it teaches the language in a more formal and structured manner as compared to the classical works of yesterday, where it's more like spoken. Because we are language teachers, we attempted to recreate some of the methodology that we use in TESOL, which is what we do professionally. And I think it's the perfect way to transmit the language for revitalization. We're teaching the language as if it is another language, a second language or third language. So, summarize, the past works of literature, a lot of inconsistency in spelling Baba Malay. Writers would spell words the way they think. There was no consensus on what is Baba, as in what is Baba Malay? Is this Malay? Is this Hokkien? Is this Baba Malay? Classic Baba Malay was written in such a way as if it was spoken. Sentence structure was different from writer to writer. And main point, it made it difficult for contemporary learners to understand. So Chrita-Chrita Baba is basically the culmination of prior works by William Gui, Philip Chan, and ourselves. Standardization was based on these prior works, and we attempted to present the language within limits of the standardization. We had variations within the standardization, for example, the halus and kasar form, the male and female speech. And we tried to stick to a very strict sentence structure form where we followed strict grammatical rules. All right, so we're done with all that. And I guess a lot of us are here for mainly this. So let's take an in-depth look at Chrita-Chrita Baba itself. Now, a quick comparison, Chrita Dulu Kala and Chrita Baba. So Chrita Dulu Kala were translations of myth, Chinese myth and classics. Characters were all Chinese. It was written in a mix of Baba, Malay, Hokkien, non-standard spelling, word choice, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Chrita Baba, however, was based on local folklore. It was written in contemporary Baba Malay and spelling very standardized. Now, why did I write this? Well, main objectives when I wrote this was I wanted to make sure that certain things were shared with readers, not just language, but local folklore. So much has been lost over time, thanks to globalization, modernization, so forth. It was a homage to our shared heritage as in who? The Malays, the Indians, the Chinese, and so forth. It's also to bring into perspective, to realization, the old Baba rituals and traditions that we might have already lost. As with all fairy tales, it's got lessons of morality, teaches a little bit of etiquette through language. I wanted to bring back the use of idioms and sayings, something that has been more or less lost in contemporary Baba speakers nowadays. We don't use as many idioms anymore. And more importantly, this is to add to our intangible heritage of our Baba culture. So I'm just going to go through some excerpts and examine various chapters in my book and explain what was going on when I did this. So one of the stories in my book is the tale of bawang putih, bawang merah. Bawang putih is garlic, bawang merah shallot, onion. Okay. Now this story, I chose this specific story because it is not very unlike Cinderella, and it is hundreds of years old. This very story has been shared around Nusantara for hundreds of years, and there are many varieties, very many variations of this story. Just think of Cinderella, right? Prince, step-parents, stepmother, stepsister, very cruel, more or less the same. But what I did was, I didn't just copy the story or just take one variation and wrote about it. I gave it a Peranakan twist. And it teaches about the morality of being good and kind and being rewarded at the end. Here's a short excerpt. I'll read it. You can read the English below. Lagikan tu hari, si bawang putih tak nanti kasih orang maki dia lagi. Lagikan tu hari, si bawang putih tak nanti kasih orang pan dia lagi. Tambah dia swakaya sama semua barang harta dari labu kecil. Lagikan tu hari, si bawang putih dapat hidup senang lenang selama-lama. So the moral of the story here, at the end of the book, she suffered a lot under her stepmother and stepsister, but in the end, she got rewarded. Besides that, not everything was all rosy and happy ending. I also wanted to bring into light all the monsters and the demons and the ghosts, all the supernatural stories that I used to hear when I was growing up. Unfortunately, I think because Singapore is too cosmopolitan, maybe we've lost all these stories. It's quite sad. The Penanggalan, everyone knows about the Pontianak, but no one knows about the Penanggalan, the Penanggalan is so much more frightening. Penanggalan is a horrifying creature that appears as a beautiful woman during the day, but a disembodied head during the night. Okay, so what basically happens is she makes a pact with a Bomo for eternal beauty, but in exchange, some nights she has to separate from her body and go and bite people and feed on their blood. Okay, and what's the point of the Penanggalan? Well, I think a lot of these stories in folklore, it's not just to be stories, but they actually teach you something. It teaches people not to wander around at night. Mind you, this was a long time ago when we used to live at the fringe of jungles, the hutan, and there used to be a lot of dangers. In fact, if you read about stories of old Singapore, there would always be stories about if you wandered too near the jungle past Senjakala, which is dusk, tigers might eat you, and that's pretty scary. So it also teaches about the price of vanity. Here is a small excerpt. Bila senjakala so sampai, tu perempuan siapkan satu tempayan besar yang ada isi cuka. Tu perempuan pun mulai tukir. Dia punya kepala cabut lagi dia punya badan. Bila dia punya kepala tarik keluar, lagi dia punya badan, dia menjerit-jerit pasir, kesakitan banyak teruk. Tu perempuan punya kepala pula terbang sama dia punya cacing belang yang macam ada jiwa sendiri. Pi cari rumah kocik cai. Tu perempuan betul-betul hantu yang seram sama jahat. Tu perempuan betul-betul hantu Penanggalan. I wanted to say hantu, I said auntie. Okay, other folklore. This one is very famous. Some Baba families still know about this and threatened. I was threatened as a child until quite old. Don't go out and play after dusk, or the hantu tetek will catch you. I don't know whether you've heard of this one. So a hantu tetek was a very scary demon that would kidnap young men and children if they dared venture out after dusk. So again, there's that theme where you don't go out, play after dusk, don't wander around at night. Again, the whole jungle thing. And it makes sense because dusk, it's quite a dangerous time. There were mosquitoes and God knows what else out there back in the day. Okay. So here's another quick excerpt. Bila tu budak kerja, dia punya bola sampai dekat pokok-pokok, dia bersuah sama satu perempuan tua yang suah pongotkan dia punya bola. Tu budak tak nampak tu perempuan tua punya muka sama terang. Pasal tempuh suah senjakala. Hari mau gelap. Tambah, tu perempuan diri di bawah pokok. Tu pokok ada bayangkan dia punya muka. Dia punya potongan badan ada macam besar sama gemuk. Tu budak tak nampak apa lagi. Pasal tu perempuan putih rambut ada sembunyi dia punya badan juga. So that's the hantu tetek over there. So, moving on. I'm rushing a bit, running out of time. Okay, anyway. I also wanted to bring into light the whole halus and kasar form, which is basically the refined and the coarse form. Female versus male speech. The halus form, as used with the Nyonyas back in the day, would have the air sound. So in Standard Malay and in Kasar Baba Malay, words like bayar, which means to pay, the Nyonyas of back in the day would pronounce bayer. Ajar, to teach, Nyonyas would pronounce as ajer. And lepas would be pronounced lepe. And most Nyonyas back in the day would be very, very delicate. They would be very polite and delicate. They would rarely use the term gua, which was considered a little bit kasar, a little bit rough. So they would say saya instead. So for example, I have here a little cartoon. It's actually from the book. So this lady is talking to a bomo. And she wants to pay for a service. So she goes, jangan khawatir, saya ada duit. Lu cakap lu mau berapa? Saya boleh bayar. And here she's actually angry. So she's actually being a little bit rude already by using lu rather than the name, you know. And this is the male form of the speech. Ha 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 ha. Baiklah, kalau ni macam, mari gua ajar. So it's ajar. So the men used to use this term. The women used to use that term. But in contemporary Baba Malay, we tend to use the alus form simply because the coarse form, the kasar form, is too similar to Standard Malay. So we want to kind of differentiate that we are different, you know, and it also sounds very unique, sounds nicer. And besides that, there are also traditions and rituals that I wanted to bring to light in the book, things that people rarely practice, if anymore. And one of them that I always found fascinating was asap rumah. And what asap rumah is, you incense the house. And asap rumah was traditionally done before dusk every Thursday. It is performed to purify the house, and the smoke of from the incense wood was said to cleanse the house from unclean beings, and more importantly, to appease the penunggu rumah, which was a supernatural being, a house guardian in the house. So by doing this, you kind of appease the spirits, and they will take care of your house. If you don't, then the reverse would happen, kind of. And there's always still the repeated concept of senjakala. Senjakala just means dusk. It's actually the time between sunset and when it gets dark. So that time when it's orangey and almost purplish sometimes, those few minutes, that's senjakala. And senjakala was especially dreaded by the Babas. And this is actually a practice that we inherited from that we share from the Malays, from the Malay culture. And Sinjakala was said to be a time when all the supernatural, all the bad stuff would be free to roam the world. And mothers would be especially careful to make sure children don't go out play around this time. In terms of, if you examine this under a scientific lens, it might be because of mosquitoes. I mean, dengue, malaria at that time. It makes plenty of sense. Bring your children back, right? Tigers will start coming out. And throughout the story also, we talked about the Bomo. And the Bomo was the ever-present shaman, healer, practitioner. He was neither good nor bad, or rather he can be good, he can be bad, depending, right? In several stories in this book, the Bomo was called upon, sometimes to do good, sometimes to do evil. So for instance, there's this thing called Nasik Wap. where sometimes jealous wives would seek out a bomo to try to learn the incantation necessary to invoke nasi wap. And what happens is the woman would invoke this nasi wap and charm the rice and feed it to the unsuspecting husband. And once the husband eats it, finish, habis, slave. So a quick excerpt from the book about nasi wap. You can read the translation below. Bila dia tentu, dia seorang, dia pun lekeh-lekeh siapkan makanan buat makan malam. Ikut ilmu yang pawang sua ajar dia. Dia jongkok atas periuk nasi sama selakan dia punya sarung. Dia pun bacakan kata-kata yang pawang sua ajarkan dia buat nasi wap. Darah dari dia punya turun darah titik kat dalam nasi. Pawang sua ajar dia cara bikin nasi wap buat kunangkan dia punya laki. Bila sua siapkan, bini kecil pun panggil dia punya laki makan. Dia punya embok jantan pun tak sedar langsung apa sua jadi. And almost towards the end, there's the whole concepts of datuk. Datuk are like spirits or deities. And the Babas used to believe that spirits are everywhere and you've got to pay them respect. As mentioned earlier, the penunggu rumah, the home guardian, is an example of a datuk. And these spirits are always venerated at shrines and much is done to appease them. For example, I think Dr. Phyllis Chew mentioned about Datuk Gong or Datuk Kramat, and these are still evident in some places. If you live in Teluk Kurau, for example, there's a Datuk Gong shrine on the main road, in fact. If you go to Little India, where the Indian Heritage Museum is, right outside in the corner, there is another big shrine, a Datuk Gong shrine. Unfortunately, these things are all, knowledge about them or interest in them have more or less been lost. So it's quite sad. And lastly, pantun. Pantun is very much part and parcel of our tradition, our language. Back then, a lot of people could just coin up a simple pantun. Some would be better than others, but the majority of Baba people would enjoy a good pantun. So let me recite a short one for you from the book. And this is a story of a lazy Baba. And so his friends challenged him to go to get a job, find work. And his response to them was, burung terbang tinggi-tinggi, betul bebas, betul bergengsi. Senangkan badan, senangkan diri, itulah gua punya janji. So he replies using a pantun, which was very common back in the day. So, good timing. In conclusion, all right, Peranakan culture today is more focused on the tangible, tangible as in the material culture. Not much is given to the intangible part of Baba culture, which is so sad because the traditions, beliefs, rituals are all degraded. Well, why? Well, due to modernization, national policies, religious transition, so forth. But I wish something more was being done to keep our culture. And the intangible culture is just as important as the tangible culture. So I have written this book. It is to pay homage to the practices, traditions that once defined our culture. It's also a resource for learners of the language. I hope it will serve to be useful for people who are interested in learning the language, or at least learning a little bit about our culture, or at the very least be a little bit entertaining. I want to bring awareness about our culture, our language, and I hope that this book will spur other writers to come forward, contribute to the Baba literature. In fact, I do know of one Wawak who has actually, because of this book, she's taken interest to actually start writing a storybook. So hopefully that will come out soon. I really look forward to that. And lastly, I really, really sincerely hope that this book will spur on interest for people to learn the language. It's endangered, so we need more people to have interest to learn the language. And with that, thank you very much. Kamsia, semua ada hati datang ni hari. Give you back to Daniel. Daniel. Oh, Daniel.
So, hi. Yeah, thank you so much, Kenneth, for the very insightful talk. Talking about intangible heritage in language, and then also kind of being a very like bundling up in a conscientious way the incorporation of standardization, traditions, and rituals. It's very thorough kind of research being done into writing this book. So right now, I will pull up this slide about the Q&A. We will start very soon. So in the meantime, perhaps you can take a few seconds to think about any questions that you would like to ask Kenneth, and then we will begin the Q&A. In the meantime, I think I was curious, Kenneth, about kind of your background that spurred you on to doing this book in general. Like, what was your interest that spurred you on to want to contribute to this?
To Chrita-Chrita Baba. Well, I am a teacher of Baba Malay. So we've ran through several rounds of classes. I think it's been 2 years. And I've noticed that even though we have a sizable group of graduates, a lot of these people do not have families who can speak Baba Malay. So after they graduated, unless they kept in touch and join our coffee chat sessions, it was like any other language. Once you learn a language, you don't use it, you will lose it, right? So there was nothing to read, there was nothing to see. I mean, there's wayang Peranakan, but that's just like once a year. So there was a need for resources to be out there. And I felt that telling my students, go read Chrita dulu kala, I mean, that would be a monumental task. I mean, even our elders have problems understanding the older versions of Chrita dulu kala. So something needed to be done. So I thought, okay, let me write some stories. So it started with like really short stories that would hand out. But after a while, I thought, let's just do a book. Let's get a grant and do a book. So ta-da, that's what happened.
Okay, so yeah, thank you for outlining that a bit more. I think it was very interesting to see you kind of associate this idea of like morals to the Chrita Baba, which reminded me of how Dr. Azhar talked about the Syair and like the moralistic tone of a lot of these pieces of literature. So
that's quite alien these days, unfortunately. I mean, in stories. Yeah.
I think that would then be related to one of these questions that asked about why did you choose to work on the Chrita dulu kala specifically instead of other Peranakan literature?
Oh, I would love to know what other kinds of Peranakan literature. Now, again, don't forget, there is a wealth of Peranakan literature in Indonesia, but that is something what I deem entirely different from what we use over here. Our Baba Malay, as in Penang, Malacca, Singapore, right, specifically. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. In terms of material, why Chrita dulu kala specifically? No, seriously, what else is there? Have I missed something? I know there are newspapers and all that. Now, newspapers like Bintang Timur by Song Ong Siang and all that, it's actually, I wasn't able to get my hands on the physical copy. Obviously, it's really rare, but I managed to find little excerpts of it. It is largely very Malay. I mean, Sir Song Ong Siang actually was trying to champion that people, people as in the Baba community, improve their Malay and learn high Malay. What's used in government and administration instead of staying with what he deemed as a little bit inferior Baba Malay. So yeah. So in terms of material resources, what else is out there? It's very limited. So if you do know something, do tell me. I'm interested. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think there's some questions that came from our audience about standardization and the reception of various groups to the standardization. So we've got questions from Alex about how if Malaysian or Indonesian readers accepted your Baba Malay standardization after reading the book, and another from Benjamin about whether Baba Malay is doing well in Indonesia, or so kind of talking a bit about the
Okay.
transnational nature of this language.
Okay. Sorry about the clock. It's an old clock. Okay. Standardization outside of Singapore and outside of Singapore. Well, I'm not sure, to be honest. I would think, I know there are curious people in Indonesia who have approached me or joined up with the classes that I'm teaching just for the sole purpose of finding out what the difference is between Baba Malay and Bahasa Indonesia, for example. So it's not really so much a reaction, it's just curiosity. I've yet to actually engage in dialogue with these people about what do you think, whether, in terms of with Malaysia, let's say our Baba Malay speaking cousins in Malacca, they recognize, well, there are some people who have recognized that it's good that something is being done. There's another group that says nothing needs to be done because we still speak it, which I find a little bit, I'm unconvinced there, simply because I think it's been mixed a little bit with Standard Malay. They have the advantage of knowing Standard Malay, and sometimes that blurs the line. What is Baba? And again, this comes back to my earlier question, which I would love a researcher to address, which is, where do you draw the line where Malay stops and where Baba starts, that whole thing. And sometimes when I talk to people and they go, that's not Baba, that's Malay, I was like, no, that is Baba. It's like, I can prove it, but because, well, it differs from family to family, of course. But therein lies the question again, where do you draw that line? Is there a line? That would be a very good research topic. So anyone out there, please go forth, learn, find out, tell me. I would love to know. Yes. So reactions, mixed reactions. Acceptance, yes and no. With every endeavor, every attempt of standardization, there will be elements, people, groups who will not agree, obviously. I mean, the whole process of standardization, the whole theory of stages of standardization, it's all about politics, really. It's about forcing people into, this is the standard, take it or leave it, or you'll be outcast. Part of it, part of the acceptance is actually shaming the people who don't accept. Of course, that's not my job. I'm not doing that, but I'm just saying that with other cultures, it has, where standardization took place, this is the common practice. So reception, good, bad, yes, I hear it all, yes. But I make no apologies. I think this is something needs to be done rather than criticizing and saying, no, this is not right, this is not how we say it. Do something about it. Our language is already so critically endangered. So if I'm wrong, prove me wrong and help out, instead of saying, thumbing your nose up in the air and saying, this is bad, this is wrong. Do something about it. Yeah.
I think it's interesting about your point about resistance, or just kind of people who are in different camps, basically, about like whether something is standardized or not. And it is interesting that you pointed out politics in that sense. I think in response to your question about whether there is a line that we can draw, I don't think it's discrete as
Oh no,
you might think, right?
not so black. It's definitely not black and white at all.
Yeah.
But who knows? I think it's an interesting research topic nonetheless, and I would be very interested to find out, like, roughly what goes on. Yeah.
Yeah, so that also partially answers Yun Ho's question also about national language policy and therefore standardization of Baba Melayu within different countries as well. Yeah, so let's see. I think there were some more questions about the Chrita in the past. You mentioned that they were translations of Chinese novels. So were there any from the past that were original fiction or from the region, as what you are trying to highlight through your book?
Not off the bat, no. I do actually have a compilation of almost every Chrita Baba story written. It was actually compiled by Uncle William Gui, and he states now what it's all about. I've only glanced through it. I didn't see anything that would suggest an original story. However, I suppose there is one by, strangely, by William Shellowbear, which is not exactly a Chinese story, Chinese characters, yes, because it was actually, he was writing about the conversion of a Chinese person to Christianity, because after all, he was a missionary, a Methodist missionary, if I'm not mistaken. And he wrote that book to try to reach out to the Baba community in hopes to convert them. Yeah. So that's, I guess, well, quite original, right? Not about Chinese mythology and so forth. Yeah. But other than that, off the bat, no, I cannot claim that I know any. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but as far as I know, I don't. I'm not sure.
That's quite interesting. So it means that
there's a lot, and there's a lot of missing gaps in the catalog of Cerita Dulu Kala, and unfortunately, it's very difficult to find an actual copy to go through. I mean, the library has quite extensive collection, but rumor has it the best collection is actually located in the UK. So it's a bit unfair, isn't it? Right. All right. So yeah. Anyway.
I think one point that wasn't mentioned during the talk was kind of the format of the Cerita Dulu Kala. So they come in volumes, and they, correct me if I'm wrong, like they are sequential in a sense, more like a magazine that where a story continues.
Yes, it's true. It's true. And I kind of tried to copy certain aspects of the formatting in my book, where, you know, when the story ends, Chan Kim Boon especially would end it with like, wow, here I end. Okay, when you read it, you'll be so excited. I bet you cannot wait for the next series and so forth. Yeah, most of them were serialized, but there were some that were standalones too. But I think the one, when we think about Cerita Dulu Kala, a lot of us will think straight away about Sam Kok and Chan Kim Boon Sam Kok, which was 30 volumes. So that was the largest, and chances are, if you found one in your home, chances are it's probably that one, because it was so popular.
Yeah, and I guess if you don't have certain volumes, then it means you just missed out the whole part of the story just because it's all one series. Okay, thank you for that. So Sam asks more of a methodical question for you. Do you write your short stories in English first and then translate them into Baba Malay, or vice versa, or a little of both?
Very good question, and a lot of people find it surprising, but I actually write it in Baba first. Yeah, so I write it in Baba, and yeah, and then I do the translation, and then I get my wife to help me with the translation to do the edits. And I try to write the English portion, translated almost word for word. So sometimes it doesn't work out because certain things just cannot be translated literally. And I know she used to point out that sometimes while writing in English, I would use Malay words because and she go, oh, why do you do that? You know, you use a Malay Baba word. And sometimes when you are doing this direct translation, your brain gets wired wrongly and you cannot realize, you're looking at it and say, what's wrong? There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah, so anyway, to answer your question, yes, in Baba, I do it in Baba.
That's quite interesting, yeah, because I think some people have asked, like BX, Benjamin, as well as someone else, Benedict, yeah, asks about kind of modern terms. So to ask Benedict's question, thank you for the fascinating and motivating talk. I would like to know if you see modern terms such as internet, television, etc., entering contemporary Baba Malay speech or literature. The Kristang language is also being revived and revised with the inclusion of such modern terms to better appeal and be more relevant to today. So young Kristang contributors are cross-referencing modern terms from Portuguese and Malay to see what the best word for internet for contemporary Kristang.
Yes,
So do you see the similar to Baba Malay? Thank you.
not formally, but there's a general convention where if a word does not exist in Baba Malay, and I suspect this practice might be a little bit different in Malacca. If the word doesn't exist in Baba Malay, or people don't know it, they will automatically use an English word, right? So terms like modern terms like computers and telephone, for that matter, even though telephones existed back then. But telephone in Malay is also telephone, by the way. So and as we've seen in the letter that I showed you from Felix Chia, there were a lot of business terms that were borrowed from English. So yeah, it's a general convention in Baba Malay. If the word does not exist in Baba, we use English words. Yeah, I think once upon a time we would have used a Hokkien word, but of course that's been lost, the knowledge of Hokkien. So we use English words. Do we create words? I think that would be quite a feat. And I know the Kristang has they're trying to develop new words, and I think that's very, very admirable, and kudos to them. They are doing an amazing job. I wish Baba Malay revitalization was even a small fraction of what they were doing, because it's amazing work what they're doing. Sadly, it doesn't exist. Revitalization here is a very small group, and sadly we are a larger community but not enough support, which is very sad. Yes, shame on all of you.
Okay. Yeah, so if anyone's interested in, contributing to this, like feel free to contact Kenneth
Angry
and join.
author.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So in relation to that as well, so thank you for your talk from Chrislyn. Earlier on, you mentioned that intangible cultural heritage came about due to vibrancy of that language, swearing, curse words. However, with the structured form that you foresee contemporary Baba Malay to be, do you see any challenges in maintaining that aspect of spontaneity and witty banter?
To be witty requires fluency and proficiency. So is it possible? Yes, of course it's possible. I do it at home all the time. But do I see learners reaching that level of fluency? Well, I don't know. It's hard to say, right? But is it possible? Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so thanks for that question. So Teddy asks, following up to your curiosity pertaining to Malay and Baba Malay in usage, can a slant of Baba Malay be advocated that lends it to greater practicability? So notwithstanding language policies that we have, do you think, because Baba Malay knowing Malay helps in learning Baba Malay, so do you think some form of practical Baba Malay can be made more popular in Singapore?
Well, since you brought that up, I was recently asked almost that similar question. Certain things in Singlish are actually, in fact, Baba Malay terms. I cannot think off the bat, but sometimes when I hear them, sometimes just going through life, you hear a term and you think it's a Hokkien term, but actually it's actually a Baba Malay term. A shock for one. That's a very, did you know that that's actually a dirty word, but we use it in context of food and all that? So that's, for example, that's actually a Baba word. So is it useful? It's evident in the language today, in our culture. Even the use of gua, for example, with Malay speakers, some of them actually use the word gua when they want to sound a little bit more forceful. So that's interesting. It has made its footprints with other languages. So yeah, but can we make it practical? Oh, difficult, very difficult. Now, very difficult. Perhaps once when it was so popular, when it was the lingua franca, definitely. But today, oh, how are we going to do such a thing? Multimedia, social media. But that's not for me to do. That's for somebody else to do. Yeah.
This is in relation to Matthew's question about, younger Peranakans preserving the language, talking about words like Mia instead of Punya, which some say is more Malay. So, I mean, your example just showed that not even within the Peranakan community itself is this language kind of bleeding out and being
Oh,
used. So
okay.
perhaps.
I would probably like to address that. It's not so much this is Malay, that's Baba, and so forth. You know, like Punya and Nia, or Nia, or Yang and Nang, all same meaning. Selamat and Slamat, Berapa and Berapa. It's basically the shortening of words. So it's usually spelled in the full sense, but pronounced when spoken, it is shortened. It's just like no one says I am going. You say I'm gonna. It's not I want to, I wanna. So it's basically formal and informal, and it's nothing. It's nothing to do with this is Malay or that's Baba or vice versa. It's basically what's that term to shorten? I am and all that. Yeah. Sorry?
A contraction.
Contraction, that's what. Basically a contraction. So for example, if you were to speak very quickly, gua punya kawan ni hari mau makan kat rumah gua. So if you want to say that very quickly, you say gua punya, it's a very lengthy, very long. So you would say very quickly, gua punya kawan mau makan kat sini. You say it very quickly. So you contract. So basically they are more or less contractions of words.
Okay.
Lesions.
Oh, lesions. Okay, so that is also slightly related to Jerome's question about the line between Baba Malay and Bazaar Malay, because maybe there is some practical usage to Bazaar Malay, and then the use of it within very common situations might also lend some lesions, contractions to
Yes.
them. But do you have any other? Yeah.
Bazaar Malay, yeah. I suppose in non-Peranakan communities, for instance, in Malaysia, certain forms of Bazaar Malay still exist where communities, Chinese communities, Indian communities communicate with their Malay neighbors and their own community, and they use a form of Bazaar Malay, I suppose. So it's not entirely dead. You might probably even hear Malay people using those Hokkien words and so forth. It still exists. It's very informal, but it's Baba Malay probably evolved, like I was trying to say, it evolved from Bazaar Malay. So it's not exactly the same thing, but it's close, but not the same, So yeah. But unfortunately, our language is dying out. Bazaar is still there. Not enough people using it.
Okay, so we'll then just let me tweak the direction of this conversation to talking about learning Baba Malay then. I think Dr. Nala mentioned last week that most learners of Baba Malay are of the older generation, and from sitting in on some of your classes, I also kind of noticed that as well. So have you seen this in your own teaching, and what do you think about it?
The general, yes, that is the general demographics of our students, older people. And they are mostly there to reminisce or to talk about the old times. Oh yes, mother used to talk like that, grandmother used to talk like that. I want to reminisce, to learn a little bit so I can tell my children and so forth. That was the initial. When you join our classes, it was more or less like that. I think you were just a handful of the younger ones. But I'm starting to see a change in trend now. We are starting to get younger, not young, younger people, which is good. I'm starting to see people in their 30s to 40s now, which is heartfelt. And these are young parents, and they want to pass on the language to their children. If this trend keeps happening, I think there might just be hope for the language to stretch out our survival one more generation, or maybe two more generations. As it is right now, kita mau cakapan tak harap lah. No hope for our language the way it's going. It will die out very soon. It's doomed for museums and documentation libraries and so forth. But in terms of a living language, as of now, still quite dire. but it's starting to change a little bit, but it might be a little bit too little, too late kind of situation. So yeah, right.
So yeah, that indirectly answers Hyunji's question. So thank you. I'll mark that as answered. So the significance of preserving Peranakan heritage and what happens if we don't do it. Okay, so looking at this language in terms of current developments in technology. So I'm rephrasing Benjamin's question a bit, taking a bit different direction. So how can you see technology helping this language, or if any?
I can't see it. I do see potential of technology. We recently, not recently, over a year ago, we had one of our students who became our friend and then started volunteering, helping out a lot. And she took over our Instagram. And this is an area where I am totally clueless about Instagram, Facebook. I'm totally hopeless at all this, and honestly, not much interest in it. I just use it as tools if I have to. But she started putting like snippets, things on Instagram, and it garnered a lot of response for that time when she was actively promoting the language on Instagram. So I do see a potential of using modern technology to somehow reach out to younger people. Unfortunately, I'm not the one to do it because I'm not to say hopeless. I'm technology. I in social media, so to speak. So it would be great if other people could step out and help out, you know. So to answer that question, yes, very, very useful. I see potential. It could possibly help out a lot. But yeah, but who's going to do it, huh? Yeah.
I think at this point can also mention the digitalization of the Baba William Greaves dictionary into something online. So I think that could also be another step in using technology
Oh
to
yes, yes, that was very, very
help.
helpful. Totally illegal, but yes, yes. Don't mention that. Yes, it's out there mainly as a tool for people who want to learn and use the language. Very handy, an online dictionary. Yes,
Okay.
babamalay.com dictionary. Yeah.
Okay, so with that, we have one more question, which I guess will relate to whatever you would say next. So from Catherine, hi Ken, I'm a Nyonya, but I'm just beginning to appreciate my heritage and language. Where can I get a copy of your book? And also, where can I learn the Baba language?
Ah, thank you so much, Nyonya Catherine. Log on to babamalay.com and everything you need to know about the language and the book and events and so forth are listed down there, including classes. In fact, we have started a first time doing classes online, something I was very hesitant to do because as a teacher, I always find it easier to teach in person. But I think because of the current situation, it's just something we have to do. So anyway, babamalay.com, log in, everything you need to know is there, including the book.
And yeah, also the Instagram and Facebook, I think that would help those who are more social media related. Okay, so thank you so much for the Q&A session. It was very, very interesting and also very, yeah, nice to talk to you. So that is all the time that we have for the program today. So everyone, please thank Kenneth once again. And a big thanks to all of you, our audience, for joining us this evening and for sticking it out with us throughout this talk series. So if you are keen on visiting the Baba House, do refer to the information on this slide, and tickets can be booked through KeyTix. So if you also enjoy our offerings at NUS Baba House, please also consider supporting us by donating through the QR code provided. So the Baba House donation fund is under NUS Giving, NUS Center for the Arts, and it will help very much in allowing us to conceptualize new programs for the students and public. So you can kind of see the way you can donate through this slide over here. So finally, please leave your feedback through this code displayed. Thank you so much everyone for leaving feedback before. It will really help us in shaping our future programs. So we'll also send a link through the chat. And that is all from us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, and until the next program.